All right, I want you to imagine waking up every single morning before the sun even rises, only to step right back into an environment dominated by blaring machines, heavy heat, and just endless exhaustion. In this explainer, we're diving into the incredibly compelling story of a young man named Mason. The source material paints this deeply resonant picture of a factory worker who found himself totally trapped in a repetitive, machine-like existence. You know the drill: wake up, work, come home exhausted, sleep, and repeat. It's a harsh reality that so many people unfortunately find themselves stuck in, literally feeling like life is just passing them by while they remain completely frozen in one place. And you know that old bleak piece of advice, dreams don't pay bills? Well, that mindset is exactly what trapped Mason and his entire community in a vicious cycle of just surviving. I mean, think about it. When you grow up in an environment where almost everyone around you works absolutely grueling jobs, dreams tend to disappear pretty early on. People in Mason's town had basically just accepted their heavy reality. They'd tell each other things like, hey, this is just life, and dreams don't pay bills. It's a terrifying psychological trap, really, because when you're constantly surrounded by limitation, your mind actually starts to accept that limitation as normal. And that mindset, it builds into a really tough generational cycle. Just look at the vivid contrast here. On one hand, you have Mason's fading ambition at barely 19 years old. And on the other, his father's grueling 20-year physical breakdown. Mason literally watched his dad work 12-hour shifts at a steel factory for 20 decades. And the result? His body broke down, he had constant back pain, and guess what? The money problems never completely disappeared anyway. Then, Mason graduates and walks into the exact same factory. The heat and the repetitive labor immediately start draining him. It's like looking into a terrifying mirror. The father's physical toll over 20 years is instantly reflected in the son's emotional defeat in just his first few weeks. There's this one chilling moment where an older worker Mason bumps into during a lunch break, just drops this heavy truth bomb on him. He basically says that after enough years there, you just stop expecting life to change. Wow, that was a massive wake-up call for Mason. It showed him, plain as day, that people slowly surrender their dreams without even noticing it happening. It doesn't all vanish at once, right? It happens day by day, shift by shift, until the hope is just completely drained out of you. Mason realized those guys weren't weak. They were just beaten down by years of the exact same routine. And of course, add social media to the mix, right? Modern comparison culture just dumps gasoline on that fire of hopelessness. Mason would be scrolling online, seeing people flaunting luxury lifestyles, total freedom, and unshakable confidence, even if, let's be real, half of it is just fake internet guru posturing. But then he looks up at his actual physical reality, surviving inside loud metal walls, completely dead on his feet. The extreme contrast between that digital illusion of a perfect life and his physically painful daily grind made him feel entirely mentally trapped. So it all comes to a head at exactly 2 a.m. You know the hour, that specific time in the dead of night that we all seem to reserve for our deepest existential dread. Earlier that evening, Mason had been sitting by himself in the parking lot, his hands physically aching, watching an older, defeated worker slowly shuffle away from the factory. And in that man's painful posture, Mason saw his own exact future playing out. It hit him like a freight train. Time is going to move forward whether you grow or not. If you don't actively build your future, life is going to quietly build a really average, painful one for you. Unable to sleep, he just sat there in the silence at 2 a.m., finally ready to make a choice. That very night, Mason grabs a notebook and writes down one simple but incredibly powerful sentence. My life will become bigger than this. Simple words, sure, but emotionally, absolutely monumental. That was the exact moment he dug his heels in and refused to accept an average life. It was the very first time in years he truly believed change was actually possible for him. He didn't know exactly how he was going to do it yet, but the mental shift had already happened. And transformation always begins in the mind before it ever shows up in your physical reality. Now, here's how he actually pulled it off. And spoiler alert, notice what is completely missing here. He did not wait around for motivation. Mason didn't wait for the perfect conditions, because waiting for perfect conditions is pretty much a guaranteed way to fail. Instead, he leaned on these small, silent daily habits that forced him to grow during some deeply uncomfortable seasons. We're talking exercising before his brutal shifts, reading a book while everyone else complained in the break room, learning online when he was already running on empty. It was agonizingly slow, and externally, nothing looked different. But internally, he was forging ironclad discipline. As he's making these tiny 1% gains every day, he enters what the source material calls the lonely phase. He realized his complaining, mocking coworkers were totally stuck in a state of deep hopelessness, which is arguably the biggest prison in life. They'd laugh at his books and tell him life just wasn't that serious. But Mason finally understood the trap. Once people stop believing change is possible, they literally stop trying altogether. They get addicted to their comfort zones and their excuses. Mason absolutely refused to let himself fall back into that mindset. Life is never going to just hand you a massive transformation without a fight, is it? Just as he was really hitting his stride internally, life threw a massive curveball, a year later with unexpected factory layoffs. Fear was just spreading everywhere. Mason's family still relied on his income, and suddenly, all that quiet, steady progress he had made felt incredibly fragile. He couldn't sleep, he couldn't focus, and all of those old insecurities and the sheer, raw panic of poverty came rushing right back in. Sitting alone in his car on a rainy night, feeling totally overwhelmed and honestly ready to just throw in the towel, Mason had this absolute game changer of an insight. He realized discipline is most important when emotions disappear. What an incredible truth. Real growth isn't about pushing forward when you feel super motivated or totally safe. Real growth means continuing despite feeling absolute fear. So instead of folding under the uncertainty of the layoffs, Mason doubled down on his focus. Over the next 2 years, he was quietly building some highly valuable concrete skills. We're talking leadership, communication, the ins and outs of digital business, and serious organization. And remember, he wasn't doing this in some fancy university lecture hall. He was scraping this together in the margins of a seriously punishing life. And eventually, all that quiet, relentless preparation met an unexpected opportunity. A small manufacturing company was looking for someone to help manage their operations. Cut to the job interview, Mason is up against candidates with way flashier resumes and much more on-paper experience. But he stood out for one very specific reason. His brutal factory years had built a profound emotional maturity and resilience that you just can't fake. He didn't have to project some fake bravado because he possessed genuine strength built through actual painful effort. The hiring managers picked up on that authentic mindset immediately, and surprisingly enough, he landed the job. All right, let's turn the spotlight onto you for a second. Are you tired of just surviving? Does your own environment make success feel completely impossible? Look, it's incredibly easy to hear Mason's story and brush it off, thinking, well, he's just an exception. But the source material really challenges us to examine our own lives. Are we stuck in that exact same repetitive exhaustion that Mason managed to claw his way out of? Are you just surviving your shifts, your days, your weeks? If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, please remember this undeniable truth. Your current situation is temporary if you keep growing. A person can completely rebuild themselves from the ground up through discipline. It's not magic, and it sure isn't luck.
It is one painful sacrifice, one newly formed habit, and one difficult day at a time. The process is painfully slow, but consistency will eventually change absolutely everything.
Fast forward a few years, Mason is this confident leader, making a better income, enjoying actual freedom, and carrying a peaceful mindset. While giving a talk to a group of young workers, someone asked him the golden question: what actually changed his life? He shared this exact thought: I became tired of surviving, so I started rebuilding myself. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't blame his town, he didn't blame the factory, and he didn't sit around waiting for a savior. He just quietly went to work on himself, proving that an insecure, exhausted worker could absolutely become a leader of others. So I'm going to leave you with this one final, slightly uncomfortable thought as we wrap up today. Will you stay average? The choice is entirely yours. Will you start building your discipline in silence today, even when it's uncomfortable and lonely? Or will you do nothing and just let life quietly build an average, painful future for you? Take a hard look at your daily habits right now, because those habits are actively building the reality you're going to have to live in tomorrow.